Alright, now in this video we're going to look at the 5-number summary and box plots. So the 5-number summary consists of the minimum, Q1 or the first quartile, the median, also known as Q2 or the second quartile, Q3, the third quartile, and the maximum. So we have a data set here. We need to find the 5-number summary for this data set. I've gone ahead and done that in Excel. So we have a minimum of 50. Our first quartile is 72. Our median is 75. The third quartile is 81. And the maximum is 92. That is the 5-number summary. It's 5 numbers that summarize our data set. It's also the numbers that split our data set into those quarters that we get from these quartiles. So now a box plot is a visual representation of this 5-number summary. It's a pretty picture that we're going to draw. So I have some directions here that you can follow. I'm going to follow these directions, but I'm not going to read through them. You guys can do that on your own. I'm going to go ahead and come down to example 2, which is to use the 5-number summary we just found to create a box plot of the data. So here's our 5-number summary. I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it up here at the top of the page. I'm just going to put a comma in between each number. That way I know which number is which value. So I have my minimum, Q1, median, Q3, and maximum. Just relist it up here so I can easily see these guys. So the first thing I want to do when I'm creating a box plot is I want to calculate my lower and upper fences. These are going to give us data values, not data values, but numbers that help us determine whether extreme values are outliers or not. And we're going to label those differently if we have any. So our lower fence equation, which we can shorthand as LF, is Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. And our upper fence equation, shorthanded to UF, is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. And just a reminder, the IQR is Q3 minus Q1. So I'm going to use the data that we have here and we're going to find each of these values. So I'm going to start with the IQR because I need the IQR to find the upper and lower fences. So my IQR is going to be my Q3, which was 81, minus Q1, which is 72, which is 9. So now I'm going to find my lower fence using the formula. So Q1, that's 72, minus 1.5 times my IQR, which I just found was 9. When you do this, make sure if you're using a calculator that you can't type all of this in all at once, like your phone calculator or some very basic calculators, which is totally fine. Just make sure you do the multiplication first, then go back and do the subtraction. So if I multiply this through first, I get 72 minus 13.5, and that equals 58.5 for my lower fence. Now I'm going to do the upper fence. That's going to be my Q3 value, which was 81, plus 1.5 times our IQR value of 9. Again, we want to make sure that we do the multiplication first, following the correct order of operations. So that gives us 81 plus 13.5, which is an upper fence of 94.5. So these are our upper and lower fences. So the way that we determine whether or not we have any outliers is if there's a data value smaller than this or larger than this, then it is an outlier. So we're going to keep these here. We're going to use these in a little bit, but at this point we're going to go ahead and actually start drawing that box plot. So to draw our box plot, the first thing we want to start with is a vertical or horizontal line. And what we're going to do is we're going to create tally marks for this. So I'm going to look at my minimum and maximum. My minimum was 50 and my maximum was 92. So I need my tally marks to start at least at 50 and go up to at least 92. So I'm going to start at 45 just because I like to have a little bit of extra on the sides. And I'm going to evenly space these apart. And I'm going to go by 5s for this one. For smaller data sets, you could go by 2s or even 1s depending on what you're looking at. Again, kind of like with histograms, it's a little bit personal preference as to how you want to label these. But it's important that the tick marks are evenly spaced apart. Ooh, look at that. That almost never happened. It turned out perfectly. I didn't have any extra space. Okay, so that's the first thing I've done is I've created my number line. I started at a number that was at least as small as the minimum and went up to a number that was at least as large as my maximum. Go ahead and erase that. Okay, so now at this point I'm going to go ahead and start labeling values from my 5-number summary. So the first value I want to label was my median. So we found our median to be 75. So over here on my box plot, I'm going to go above the number line I've created. I don't want to go through the number line I made. I'm going to go above and I'm going to draw a vertical line above 75. Now I'm going to repeat that for Q1 and Q3, so 72 and 81. I want to draw lines that are about the same size and at the same distance above my number line. If it's not totally perfect, that's okay. We are estimating just a little bit here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the lines. So I'm going to create a box. Hey, look, this is called a box plot, and we made a box. All right, so we've labeled those 3 values. So now I'm going to incorporate this upper and lower fence that I calculated earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create little temporary brackets at 58.5, which would be somewhere down here. Ish. Okay, maybe not right there. That doesn't look right. Let's try that again. There we go. And 94.5. Now these are brackets that I'm eventually going to go back and erase. So we don't want to draw these guys in pen. Okay. So I have my brackets. So now I'm going to go back to the original data set and I'm going to look and see, do I have any values that are going to fall outside of these brackets? So above the 94.5 or below the 58.5. So coming back up to the original data set, we can see 50 is below 58.5. Our next data value was 68, so that's not going to be outside that bracket. And then up here we have 92 as our maximum. That's not outside the bracket, that's going to be inside the bracket. So we have one outlier because it's less than the lower fence of 50. So coming back to my box plot, I am going to label my outlier with a star or an asterisk, or you could even do a dot or an X. It really doesn't really matter how you label it, just so long as you label it differently than everything else so that I can look at that and say, hey, they have an outlier at 50. So we have our outlier at 50. That still doesn't look right. I'm doing this a little bit sideways, so it's not lining up right. There we go. That's better. So we have our outlier at 50. So now this is the part where it can get a little bit tricky sometimes. I'm going to go back again up to my original data set. And I'm going to say, okay, what if we didn't have that data value of 50? What if we just throw him out for a second? What would our smallest number have been? And as we can see, our smallest number would have been 68. So I'm going to label 68 as if he were the minimum for my data set. He's not the minimum. The minimum is still this guy 50. But I'm going to just pretend because otherwise we'd have an incomplete box plot. So I'm going to come back down here. I'm going to change colors for this step. And I'm going to label 68. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to find about 68. And I'm going to label him with a vertical line, kind of smaller than the other ones. He doesn't need to be as big as the ones for Q1, Q2, and Q3. He can be a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to connect that line for 68 to the line that I drew for Q1. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my maximum. And the maximum's a lot easier because we didn't have any outliers over here. If I had outliers, then I'd have to do the same thing. I have to say, okay, let's pretend that outlier didn't exist. Let's pretend he wasn't there. What would the next largest number be? And that's how I would label that. But we didn't have any outliers. So we're just going to label our maximum as we see it, which is 92. And then I'm going to connect the line for my 92 back to my Q3 line. And here we have our box plot. So the last thing I want to do is I'm going to erase those temporary brackets we drew in earlier. We don't need them. And here we have our finished box plot. Now one of the things you can do is you can go through and you can label each of the items. So here we have an outlier with a data value of 50. We aren't going to label this guy. No labeling for that guy. He's not part of the 5-number summary. We only want to label values that were part of our original 5-number summary. This guy right here, that 68, he's just kind of like a placeholder value for us. He's kind of like a what if value, but he wasn't part of that 5-number summary. So he doesn't get a label. So then I'm going to move on to my Q1, which was 72. Our median was right here, and that's 75. Your median will always be the line that's in the middle of the box plot, or in the middle of this box, even if it's off to the side a little bit. It's cutting the box in half or in thirds or whatever. And then this last line here is our Q3, which was 81. And then finally we have our maximum, which is 92. And technically over here, my minimum, I should also label him as such. So he's the minimum, he's an outlier, and he had a data value of 50. So this last step, labeling this is annotating my box plot, what I did here in gray, and that's optional. Some box plots you'll find have the annotations. Optional, there we go. Sometimes they don't. When they don't, you kind of just have to look and kind of guesstimate as to what the value might be, and that's okay. So this concludes the video on the 5-number summary, which as a reminder is the minimum, the first quartile, the median, the third quartile, and the maximum, as well as how to draw box plots, including the equations for the lower fence, the upper fence, and the IQR again for you guys. And then here's our beautiful box plot. And that's it.